The text from my sister arrived at 6:47 a.m. while I was reviewing casualty reports from our joint training exercise in South Korea. Dad asked what you do again? I told him you're still walking dogs. Easier than explaining, right? See you at the rehearsal dinner Friday. Can't wait. I stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds before setting my phone face down on my desk. Through my office window at Marine Corps Base Quantico, I could see the morning formation assembling on the parade ground. 300 Marines moving in perfect synchronization. My Marines, part of the expeditionary force I'd commanded for the past 18 months. Colonel Clarissa Ogden, United States Marine Corps, 43 years old, 21 years of service, 2 combat deployments, currently commanding officer of a Marine expeditionary unit with over 2,000 personnel under my command. My family thinks I walk dogs for a living, and I've never corrected them. The lie, if you could call it a lie, started 7 years ago, completely by accident. I'd just made lieutenant colonel and been assigned to a staff position at the Pentagon. The hours were brutal, the work was classified, and I was exhausted. When I came home for Christmas, my sister Tanya had just gotten engaged to someone named Gregory, a pediatric surgeon she'd met at a hospital fundraiser. So what exactly do you do now? My mother had asked over dinner, her voice carrying that particular tone of maternal concern that suggested she thought I'd made another questionable life choice. I coordinate logistics and operational planning, I'd said, which was technically true, mostly administrative work, a lot of meetings. My father, a successful commercial real estate developer, had frowned. That's rather vague, Clarissa. It's government work, Dad, nothing exciting. Tanya had laughed, bright and carefree. Oh, come on, you can tell us something. Do you at least get to leave the office? I'd been thinking about my morning run around the Pentagon's perimeter, my daily ritual for maintaining sanity. I get outside, take walks, several times a day actually. Walks? My mother's face had brightened slightly. Well, that's healthy at least. Fresh air is important. My father had looked skeptical. What kind of government job involves taking walks? I should have explained then. Should have told them about the classified briefings, the strategic planning sessions, the weight of decisions that affected national security. But Tanya was glowing, talking about her engagement, showing off her ring, and suddenly my vague answers about walks and administrative work seemed easier, less complicated, less likely to steal focus from her moment. You know how it is in D.C., I'd said with a shrug. Lots of bureaucracy, lots of walking between buildings. They'd accepted that answer and moved on. 6 months later, I was home for Tanya's bridal shower when my mother's friend had asked what I did for work. Clarissa takes walks, my mother had said with a slightly embarrassed smile. Government work, very active. The friend had looked confused but polite. Tanya had jumped in, laughing. Basically, she walks around Washington. It's this bureaucratic thing, very glamorous. Her tone had been affectionate, teasing, but there was something underneath it. Something sharp. I'd let it slide. Then came my promotion to colonel 2 years ago, a significant achievement. Less than 1% of Marines ever reach that rank. It came with command of an entire Marine expeditionary unit, one of the most prestigious assignments in the Corps. I was being considered for general officer positions. The command knew my name. I'd flown home for a weekend to celebrate my father's birthday. Tanya was there with Gregory, now her husband, and their 6-month-old daughter. Still with the government? My father had asked over birthday cake. Yes, sir. Same position? I've had some advancement, more responsibility. That's good. He'd said it the way you'd compliment a child for finishing their vegetables. Any chance of moving into something more substantial? Your sister's husband just made chief of pediatric surgery. That's a real achievement. I'd watched Tanya's face as he said it. Watched the way she'd preened. The way her hand had found Gregory's arm possessively. And I'd seen something else. A flicker of satisfaction when my father had dismissed my career as insubstantial. I'm content where I am, I'd said quietly. Well, as long as those walks keep you in shape, my mother had offered, trying to be encouraging. You look fit. Tanya had laughed. She's a professional dog walker at this point. Might as well make it official. The table had chuckled, good-natured family ribbing. Nothing malicious. Nothing cruel. Except it wasn't good-natured for Tanya. I'd seen it in her eyes. The need to diminish me, to keep me small, to ensure she remained the successful one, the impressive one, the daughter our parents could brag about at their country club. I'd smiled and cut another piece of cake. The pattern continued. Every family gathering, every phone call, every holiday, Tanya would find a way to mention my walking career with that same sharp-edged affection. My parents would shake their heads sympathetically, clearly believing I'd somehow squandered my potential. My extended family would offer well-meaning advice about going back to school or finding a real career. I never corrected them, partly because the truth was classified and complicated, partly because explaining my actual responsibilities seemed exhausting and pointless, but mostly because watching Tanya's desperate need to be superior had become fascinating in a clinical, detached sort of way. She'd always been competitive. Growing up, she'd needed to be the smartest, the prettiest, the most accomplished. When I'd gone into the Naval Academy and she'd gone to a state school, she'd cried for 3 days, and then declared that she, quote, preferred a normal college experience anyway. When I'd been commissioned as a Marine officer and she'd become a pharmaceutical sales rep, she'd made constant comments about how military life was so rigid and not for everyone. Then she'd married Gregory, wealthy, handsome, successful Gregory, and suddenly she'd won. She had the perfect life, the doctor husband, the beautiful house, the adorable daughter, the impressive career trajectory. And I had vague government work that involved walking. It satisfied something in her, some deep need to be the victor in a competition I'd never agreed to enter. So I let her win. I let them all believe I was drifting, underachieving, barely making ends meet with my walking job. It was easier than fighting, easier than dealing with Tanya's inevitable resentment if she knew the truth. And there was a certain freedom in being underestimated. No pressure to perform at family gatherings. No expectation that I'd contribute anything meaningful to conversations about careers or success. I could fade into the background, nod politely, and return to my actual life. The one where I commanded thousands of Marines, shaped military strategy, and briefed members of Congress on readiness and operations. But the text message this morning had felt different. The rehearsal dinner was for Tanya's brother-in-law, Gregory's younger brother who was getting married. It would be both families together, the Ogdens and the Harrisons. Gregory's family was old money, military legacy, the kind of people who had buildings named after them at West Point. And Tanya had just told our father to explain to these people that his daughter walked dogs. I picked up my phone and stared at the message again. Easier than explaining, right? 21 years of service, 2 Bronze Stars, a Legion of Merit, command of an MEU that had been recognized by the Commandant for operational excellence. I'd led Marines in combat, made decisions that saved lives, earned the respect of some of the most demanding leaders in the military. And my sister thought it was easier to tell people I walked dogs. I set the phone down and returned to my casualty reports. But something had shifted. Some calculation I'd been unconsciously running in the background of my mind for 7 years had finally completed. The rehearsal dinner was in 6 days. Gregory's family would be there, including his uncle, retired General Theodore Harrison, who'd served as a 3-star general and was now on the board of advisors for the Naval War College. I'd never met him, but I knew his reputation. Everyone in the Marine Corps knew his reputation. I opened my email and composed a message to my executive officer. Captain Morrison, I need 3 days leave starting Thursday. Family obligation. You have operational authority in my absence. Brief me on anything critical. His response came back in 2 minutes. Understood, Colonel. We'll hold the fort. Give your family my best. I smiled slightly. Captain Morrison had no idea what I was planning. Neither did my family. But they would. The drive from Quantico to Greenwich, Connecticut took 6 hours. I left Thursday afternoon and arrived at the hotel in time for a quiet dinner alone in my room. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening at the Greenwich Country Club. Predictably elegant, predictably expensive, predictably designed to impress. I'd packed carefully. My dress uniform stayed in its garment bag in the car. For tonight, I wore simple black slacks and a silk blouse. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. The uniform of someone who walked dogs and tried not to embarrass her successful family. I arrived at the country club at 6:15 p.m. The event started at 6:30. Early enough to observe, late enough not to be cornered for pre-dinner conversation. The dining room was spectacular. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Round tables were arranged in a U shape, leaving space in the center for toasts. Maybe 50 people total. Both families, the wedding party, close friends. I spotted my parents immediately. My father in his expensive suit, my mother in pearls. They were talking to an older couple I didn't recognize, probably Gregory's parents. Tanya was near the bar with Gregory, laughing at something, radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I took a seat at one of the back tables, positioned where I could see everyone but remain relatively invisible. "Clarissa!" My mother spotted me and hurried over, my father following. "You made it! We were worried about traffic." It was fine. I stood to hug her. "You look lovely, dear." She held me at arm's length, studying my outfit, with barely concealed concern. "Is that what you're wearing?" I thought perhaps... Never mind. "You look fine." Translation. She'd hoped I'd wear something more impressive, something that wouldn't embarrass them in front of the Harrisons. My father kissed my cheek. "Good to see you, Clarissa. How's the walking business?" He said it with gentle mockery, the way you'd joke about a teenager's summer job. "Keeping me busy," I said evenly. Tanya appeared, Gregory in tow. "You came!" She hugged me, all warmth and sisterly affection. "I'm so glad. Come meet Gregory's family. They're wonderful." She led me around the room, introducing me to cousins and aunts and family friends. Each time, she'd say, "This is my sister Clarissa. She works for the government in D.C. Very mysterious." And then she'd laugh, and everyone would smile politely and move on. I played my role perfectly, nodded, smiled, made forgettable small talk. The invisible sister. The underachieving one. The one who made the successful daughter look even more successful by comparison. Then Tanya introduced me to Gregory's uncle. "Uncle Teddy, this is Clarissa, Tanya's sister." General Theodore Harrison was in his early 70s, still powerfully built, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that announced military service from across a room. He shook my hand firmly. "A pleasure," he said. "Are you in D.C.? "Yes, sir." "What brings you there?" I felt Tanya tense beside me. This was always the awkward moment, when someone asked directly, requiring more than vague answers. "Government work," I said. "Nothing exciting." "Clarissa's very humble," Tanya cut in quickly. "She mostly walks around the city, very bureaucratic. Not like your exciting military career, Uncle Teddy." She steered the conversation expertly away from me. "Tell her about when you served in Okinawa." The general's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, something sharp and assessing in his gaze. Then he smiled and began telling a story about his time in Japan. I excused myself after a few minutes and returned to my seat. Dinner was called. People found their tables. I was seated at the back with some of Gregory's cousins and their spouses. Pleasant people who asked polite questions and seemed relieved when I gave brief answers. The meal was excellent. Prime rib, asparagus, roasted potatoes. Wine flowed freely. Conversation hummed at a pleasant level. I ate quietly, watching the room, waiting. After dessert was served, Gregory's father stood up with his wine glass. Richard Harrison, another successful surgeon, following in the family tradition. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Tomorrow my son Peter will marry the lovely Amanda, and we couldn't be happier. But tonight, I want to take a moment to recognize the success of both families represented here." He began working his way around the room, calling out achievements. Peter's best man, who'd just made partner at his law firm. Amanda's sister, who was finishing her residency in cardiology. Gregory's cousin, who'd started a successful tech company. Each acknowledgement was met with applause and good-natured cheers. Then his gaze landed on our table. My parents, Tanya, Gregory, and a few others from our family. "The Ogden family," Richard said warmly, "has been a wonderful addition to our lives. Gregory's father-in-law, Robert, has built an impressive real estate empire. His mother-in-law, Patricia, volunteers with 3 charitable organizations and sits on the board of the local museum. And of course, Tanya herself, top sales representative at her pharmaceutical company for 3 consecutive years. You've all achieved so much." My parents beamed. Tanya glowed. Then Richard's eyes found me at the back table. "And Clarissa?" He paused, clearly searching for something to say about the dog-walking daughter. Before he could continue, my father cut in. His voice was loud enough to carry across the entire room, loud enough that 50 people turned to look. "She doesn't do much, just walks dogs in the park," he laughed, a hearty, dismissive sound. "Several times a day!" The room erupted in polite laughter. Not cruel, not harsh, Just the amused chuckle of people hearing about someone's harmless, slightly pathetic career choice. I watched my mother's face, saw the way she stared down at her napkin, shoulders hunched, face flushed with shame. She couldn't even look at me, couldn't bear to see the pity on everyone's faces as they laughed at her failure of a daughter. Tanya was smiling, openly, victoriously smiling. This was what she'd wanted. Public confirmation that I was the lesser sister, the disappointment, the one who'd never measure up. The laughter was fading. Richard Harrison was trying to recover, to say something kind about different paths, and everyone contributing in their own way. And then General Theodore Harrison, seated 3 tables away, set down his wineglass. The sound of crystal meeting wood was surprisingly loud in the settling quiet. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Every eye in the room turned to him. The general commanded attention without effort. Decades of military bearing made it impossible not to watch him. He looked directly at me across the room. His face was serious, respectful, and there was something in his eyes that might have been approval. "Colonel," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "the commandant mentioned your promotion. Congratulations." The silence that followed was absolute. I stood slowly, conscious of 50 pairs of eyes locked on me. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." "Promotion?" General Harrison continued, still holding my gaze. "Brigade command, if I heard correctly? Quite an honor. How long have you been at Quantico?" 18 months, sir. I have an MEU, about 2,000 Marines. 2,000, he nodded approvingly. And before that? Staff position at the Pentagon, sir. Strategic planning. Of course. His smile was slight, knowing. Those walks around the Pentagon building. I did the same thing during my time there. Helps clear the head between classified briefings. The pieces were clicking into place for everyone in the room. I could feel it, the collective realization rippling outward like shockwaves. My father's wineglass had stopped halfway to his mouth, frozen in midair. My mother's hand had gone to her throat, fingers gripping her pearl necklace. Tanya's face had drained of all color, her smile vanishing like it had never existed. "Colonel?" My father's voice came out strangled. "What? Clarissa, what is he talking about?" I turned to face my family's table, looked at my father directly. "I'm a colonel in the United States Marine Corps, Dad. 1st Command Marine Expeditionary Unit 11 out of Quantico. Those walks you've been joking about for 7 years? Those were me running the perimeter of the Pentagon when I was on staff, and now they're me conducting base inspections and observing training exercises. The several times a day part is because I'm usually up by 4:30 a.m. for physical training with my Marines. But you said," my mother started. "I said I took walks, I said I did administrative work, I said it was government work, all of that was true. My voice was calm, factual, without accusation. You decided what that meant. I never corrected you." 7 years, my father whispered. "You've been a colonel for 2 years. Before that, I was a lieutenant colonel. Before that, a major. I've been an officer for 21 years. I graduated from the Naval Academy. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I've been awarded 2 Bronze Stars and a Legion of Merit." General Harrison was still standing, watching this unfold with the detached interest of someone observing a tactical situation. "I should mention," he said, his voice cutting through the shocked silence, "that I spoke with Commandant Williams last week. Your name came up, Colonel Ogden. He's considering you for his next aide-de-camp position. That's typically a stepping stone to general officer ranks." He paused. "He speaks very highly of your work." Tanya's wineglass slipped from her fingers. It hit the table edge and shattered, red wine exploding across the white tablecloth like arterial spray. The sound of breaking crystal seemed impossibly loud. She jerked back, staring at the spreading stain like it was blood, her hands shaking. "Tanya!" Gregory reached for her, but she pulled away, still staring at the wine. Richard Harrison looked between me and the chaos at our family table, clearly trying to understand what had just happened. "Colonel Ogden, I had no idea. Please forgive my—" "Nothing to forgive, sir," I said quietly. "I prefer to keep my professional life private. I apologize for the disruption to your celebration." "No disruption at all." General Harrison sat back down, but his eyes remained on me, appraising. "In fact, Colonel, I'd be interested to hear about your current command. Perhaps we could speak after dinner?" "I'd be honored, sir." The room was still silent. 50 people who'd been laughing at the dog-walking daughter 30 seconds ago were now staring at a Marine colonel. The cognitive dissonance was visible on every face. My mother had tears streaming down her face, her napkin pressed to her mouth. My father looked like he'd been struck. His face was gray, his hands trembling slightly as he set down his wine glass. And Tanya was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not resentment, something closer to devastation, the complete collapse of 7 years of carefully constructed superiority. I walked slowly to their table. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, each step deliberate, measured. When I reached them, I placed my hand gently on my mother's shoulder. "Mom, it's okay." She looked up at me, mascara running. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I tried. At the beginning, you didn't listen, and after a while, I shrugged. It seemed easier not to try. But all those jokes, all those times her voice broke. "You thought you were being supportive," I said, and I meant it. "You thought I needed protecting from my own bad choices. It came from love, even if it came out as pity." My father couldn't speak, just kept shaking his head, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I turned to Tanya. She was still staring at the wine stain, her whole body rigid. "Tanya," I said softly. She looked up at me, her eyes were dry but haunted. "You needed to be the successful one," I said. "I understand. I've always understood, so I let you have it. I let you be impressive while I faded into the background. It was easier than competing." "I didn't." She swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." I squeezed her shoulder briefly. "Congratulations on your sales achievements. They're genuinely impressive. You should be proud." I stepped back, addressing the whole table. "I should go. This is Peter and Amanda's celebration. I've already disrupted it enough." "You're not leaving." General Harrison's voice came from across the room, firm and commanding. "Sit down, Colonel. Have some dessert. That's an order from a superior officer." His eyes twinkled slightly, even a retired one. A few people laughed, nervous and uncertain. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." I returned to my seat at the back table. Gregory's cousins were staring at me with new expressions. Respect, curiosity, wariness. Conversation slowly resumed, but it was different now. Quieter, more careful. People kept glancing at me, whispering. After dinner, General Harrison did indeed pull me aside. We talked for 20 minutes about command philosophy, current operations, the challenges of modern military leadership. It was a good conversation, the kind I never had with my family. He was sharp, insightful, and genuinely interested in my work. "Your family doesn't know you at all," he observed at one point. "No, sir, they don't." "That was deliberate on your part." "Yes, sir." He studied me. "Why tell them now?" I considered the question. "Because I'm tired of being invisible. And because my sister needed to know that her competition was over, one way or another." He nodded slowly. "That text message this morning, that's what did it." I looked at him sharply. "How did you—" "Because I know that look, Colonel. I've seen it on 100 officers' faces over the years. The moment when you decide you're done being underestimated." He smiled. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. Family can heal. Resentment just festers." "I hope you're right, sir." "I'm always right." He said it with such deadpan certainty that I couldn't help but smile. "Now, about that aide-de-camp position. The commandant isn't going to offer it to someone who hides from her own family. He needs officers who are comfortable with who they are, regardless of the audience. Think about that." "Yes, sir, I will." I left the country club at 9:30 p.m., walked out to my car alone, the cool Connecticut night air clearing my head. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Please come to breakfast tomorrow. We need to talk, please." Another from my father. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." I don't know what else to say. Nothing from Tanya. I didn't respond to any of them, not yet. Let them sit with it tonight, let them process what they'd learned. Tomorrow would be soon enough for conversations and explanations. I drove back to my hotel, changed into running clothes, and went for a long run through the empty streets of Greenwich. 5 miles at a hard pace, pushing myself until my lungs burned and my legs ached. When I got back to my room, I showered and sat on the bed, staring at my dress uniform hanging in the closet. 21 years of service. 2,000 Marines under my command. The respect of general officers and the consideration of the commandant himself. And all it took was one retired general, one rehearsal dinner, and 7 years of carefully maintained fiction to make my family finally see me. I picked up my phone and typed a response to my mother, "Breakfast at 8, I'll be there." Then I turned off the light and went to sleep. The next morning, I met my parents at a small cafe near their hotel. Tanya wasn't there. My mother said she wasn't feeling well, but we all knew what that meant. The conversation was painful, awkward, and necessary. They apologized, I accepted, they asked questions about my career, my life, my deployments. I answered what I could, keeping the classified details appropriately vague. "Why didn't you insist?" my father asked at one point. "Why didn't you force us to listen?" "Because I was tired," I said honestly, "and because watching Tanya need to be better than me became its own form of protection. As long as she thought she'd won, she left me alone. Let me do my job without family drama." "That's not healthy," my mother said softly. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it worked, until it didn't. They wanted to attend the wedding, to see me, to somehow make up for 7 years of misunderstanding in one afternoon. I declined gently. This was Peter and Amanda's day. My presence would only create more drama. I drove back to Quantico that afternoon, arriving at my office Sunday evening to prep for Monday's operations meeting. Captain Morrison found me there at 7 p.m. reviewing reports. "Welcome back, Colonel. How was the family obligation?" I looked up at him. "Enlightening, Captain. Everything okay?" "It will be," I smiled slightly. "One way or another, it will be." He nodded and left me to my work. I turned back to my reports, back to the familiar rhythm of command. This was my world, not wine glasses and country clubs and rehearsal dinners. This was where I belonged, where I was seen clearly, without fiction or assumptions or desperate competitions. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Tanya, "I'm sorry." Just 2 words. No explanation, no excuses. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I know, it's okay, we'll talk soon." I meant it. We would talk, eventually. Work through the complicated mess of sisterhood and jealousy and years of misunderstanding. But not today. Today, I had 2,000 Marines to lead, operations to coordinate, and a career to continue building. The dog-walking daughter had walked away from that fiction for good, and Colonel Clarissa Ogden had walked into the light.